I'm going to start out with a question, but we have time for questions from the audience. So there's a microphone set up at the back of the center aisle. And so please go to the microphone to ask your question so that our webcast audience can hear the question. And please try to keep them short and to the point so we can fit in as many voices as possible in the audience. You know, we were talking backstage for a little bit before this started about the popular movie, and I think it came out in 2017, Wind River, that brought some attention to the mass public about this issue. And I'm curious what our speakers here today think about that movie. I know some of you were talking about it backstage, the pros and cons, if you'd like to just jump in and give me your thoughts.
Well, you know, first off, it's very important to draw attention to these issues, right? So I think we all recognize the importance of raising awareness around murdered and missing Indigenous women. However, I will say, and so we thank the folks who worked on Wind River for their efforts to do that. What I would say, and it's not necessarily a criticism as much as it's just a disappointment, is as a writer who's working in that industry, you know, I have an agent at one of the most bread and butter, prestigious agencies that knows the industry. You know, when I wrote a screenplay 6 or 7 or 8 years ago that featured where the protagonist was a Native woman, was a Cherokee woman fighting to save her sisters from being murdered and was fighting on these issues, the response I got back from the major studios that do have the funding, have the millions of dollars to fund a film, was that the only way it would be made in Hollywood was if I just made the main character, the protagonist, a white person, so they could cast an actor that's famous enough to bring in enough money to get the film made. And I said, no, I don't want to tell a white savior story. I want to tell a story about Native people saving themselves, because that's what we do. And I was told that there's not funding in Hollywood for that right now. Fast forward 5 or 6 years, and here's Wind River, which is a white savior story. I mean, the Native woman who is raped and murdered, we don't even meet her until she's a victim. We don't really get to know who she was, what her hopes, what her aspirations were, who she was. We don't know. She has, I don't even know how many lines, very few, and it's basically just when you see her being a victim. And I think, so yes, I'm glad that Wind River brought more people into the conversation, but I'm also wondering what conversation are we having and who's leading the conversation. And I just think, my hope is that someday those people in power in Hollywood will recognize, first of all, we have so many talented Native actresses. It's crazy, and it's mind-boggling how Hollywood works. And even then, there were some, you know, smaller roles in Wind River. Instead of hiring Native actors, they hired Asian American actors to play Native people. We have some really talented Native women actors out there who are working really hard, but because they haven't had their big break in some film yet, I guess the powers that be don't want to, put them in this film where they're not, you know, an Angelina Jolie or a Jennifer Aniston, or I don't know all the famous people's names enough to start reciting them, but so we have a lot of work to do to get Hollywood to understand that we have a right to tell our own stories. And I can also say, watching the movie, there were just certain moments where I'm like, that's actually not correct. That's not correct. Just certain ways they framed the legal issues. And that's frustrating too. Believe me, federal Indian law, Oliphant, it's very complicated. None of it makes sense. But when you have that kind of stage and that national microphone, to get it wrong in a factual legal sense too can do harm. So again, it's a mixed bag. I mean, would I wish Wind River hadn't been made? It did start a lot of conversations, but I'm disappointed that Native women were basically left out of those conversations.
Sarah, I think you testified on the Hill, was it last week? Or maybe twice in the last month? Can you tell us a little bit about what you testified about? What were the hearings about? And if you have any hope that anything's going to come out of this?
Oh, I'm really optimistic right now. I had the pleasure of testifying in front of the House Judiciary Committee on March 7th about the Violence Against Women Act. I was the only Native woman on that panel. And then just the following week on the 14th, I had a chance to testify alongside Mary Kathryn and 2 other Native women in front of the House Subcommittee on, crime Homeland Security and something. It was another House committee on missing and murdered Indigenous women. And I know there had been one other hearing on MMIW, but not, there's not been a lot. And so both hearings were really established by Congress people who really do want to change things. And bringing a hearing is the first step in doing that. And so I'm very hopeful that we do have lawmakers in Washington now that are learning about this issue and that are asking questions and trying to come up with solutions through federal legislation. And I don't think federal legislation is the end-all be-all of this problem and this crisis, but I do believe that we need that presence in Washington. There are some things they can do. And one of those is to return our jurisdiction that was stolen from us. And only Congress can do that, unfortunately. So we do make our fights on the Hill. But I am hopeful. I am optimistic right now.
Okay, I'd like to open this up to the audience. Questions for our amazing panelists today, please. Come to the microphone. I think it's right there in the back.
I would like to thank all of you women for just eloquent, wonderful testimony. It's really been enlightening to all of us. I have a specific question, I think, to Cherrah. The issue of domestic violence, it strikes me, the report of going back now 200 years to the gentleman who had lived amongst Native people, saying that he didn't perceive abuse of women or that type of behavior in the culture. And then going forward to today and the apparently very high rates of domestic violence in Native cultures. And I'm wondering, we automatically think of alcohol, and having been several times on reservations in the West, and many of which don't allow sale of alcohol, and I'm sure there's a whole lot of factors going into this decision, but what would you say are main factors? It sounds like somehow there's been, and this is just one man's testimony from 200 years ago, but what do you see as main factors that contribute to high rates of domestic violence? And that was one question, and well, I have several others, but I'd like just some information more on that subject, and how is it being addressed in the communities?
Yeah, so, and we know most perpetrators, abusers are non-Native when it comes to our Native Indigenous women in our communities. And then those that are tribal communities, of course, when we look at Native perpetrators, that historical trauma and those things that, like the kind of some of the things you had mentioned, but then we've taken that power away and have broken down our family structures in this colonized system and saying, okay, you need to be this way, or your women are now property, or you are no longer in control of that. So trying to take that power back, but in a negative way. I think Sarah and Mary Kathryn had probably actually done actual research on that. I mean, I hate to give you my anecdotes, but I mean, those are the things that I do know that I have seen. But it's giving, I think, especially for our tribal communities, is giving that power back in a sense that it's in a good way, that it's got to be that balance. As Sarah mentioned, from our tribe, we are matrilineal, so having that balance there between the man and the woman, and it's not a hierarchy that this colonized world has created us or made us think it's supposed to be. So putting that back in balance from a traditional standpoint, and not always looking at that colonialized view of, well, the man has to be in charge and you're his property. Because again, the Violence Against Women Act, that's why it was one of the reasons why it was written, because women were the property of men if they were married. So looking at tribal specific, that's the best response from a tribal community. What can tribes do specific to help, I hate using that word, reform batterers, but that there's a process that needs to happen there from a tribal standpoint too. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if Sarah or Mary Kathryn has.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's what Cherrah is talking about. It's important to understand that our culture was taken away from us, and not on accident, through very purposeful federal policies. I mean, first of all, let's just start with removal, right? You've got whole families where not only are people, do they die on the trail, but, it's documented our women were raped on the trail, right? So you have a whole generation that experiences that trauma. You maybe slightly recover from that, and then your next generation is all taken out of the home and put in boarding schools where everyone's beaten and sexually abused. So I'm not a sociologist, I'm a lawyer and a playwright, but I think most people who study psychology or these kinds of social sciences would say, if you take a community and you put them through several generations of extreme trauma, good luck expecting that generation that first comes out to not be cycling through that trauma. And it's unfortunate that our communities have suffered through that. And I think, part of what, Cherrah is speaking about is also that cultural understanding that Sarah spoke about was taken away from us. In boarding schools, our men were taught to devalue women, that they weren't equal, and that, women do this and men do this. And so we have to restore our cultural understandings.
Are you seeing linkage, though, between alcohol, drug use, unemployment, those factors?
Certainly. I think one of the most interesting studies I've ever read comes from Canada, from a researcher named Brownridge. He studied the rates of domestic violence among Indigenous women in Canada and controlled for all of these factors you're talking about, controlled with other communities for homelessness, poverty, alcoholism, all of those things. And still, even controlling for those factors, Native women suffered the highest rates. The only thing left that wasn't factored in was colonization. And so that has to be a part of the explanation.
That's interesting. Thank you.
Go ahead.
All right, bonjour. My question is kind of more for the artists. Recently, can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, want to get a little closer to the mic?
Sure. So recently, my eldest modeled in Indigenous Fashion Week up in Toronto, and my middle child is working this weekend on the Ivy League. They're having a conference at Cornell on Indigenous fashion. So I'm really interested in the two of you maybe speaking to the role of fashion in activism and the representation of our issues as Native people, being so visible and getting a wider audience there, and the work that you've been doing just in the last couple of years, and the work you've been doing for, I'm assuming, for over a decade. And I applaud both of it, but I'm really interested in your answer for that.
Go ahead. Okay. I don't know if this is okay.
I didn't really view what I did as necessarily a fashion statement. I didn't walk up and think that I was doing this for fashion. I kind of just thought of it as, I'm going to do this because it needs to be done and talked about. I guess fashion is really, there's a big movement of people being creative and wanting to create their own regalias. But I haven't really, I don't know. I guess I shouldn't say I don't know, but I haven't really thought about it as being necessarily a fashion statement or being fashion forward in any sense, just honoring what has been taken from us and from my grandparents.
Jane?
Can you guys hear me on this thing at all? Oh, now you can, maybe. I guess through working with clothing, and I love fashion. I love fashion. I would love to create my clothing someday. I'm terrible at sewing though. I think like through doing all this work with the dresses over all these years and thinking about clothes and clothing, there's a lot of politics that goes with that, and I think that it was a result of colonization that like part of what was taken away from us was that ability to be creative and express ourselves through the creation of our clothing, and so to take that back is really a powerful thing. And clothing was a way of people kind of identifying, their community, like where they were from, the land they were from, different like patterns and things like that were specific to different nations, like it still are specific to different nations, right? And so it's like really a mark of identity, and like connecting to that power of your community and your roots. And so I feel like, and it also was a very creating clothing and wearing clothing and fashion, maybe not fashion, but all of that was women's, for the most part, a lot of it was women's work. So it's really interesting that, fashion, like being interested in fashion or clothing has somehow become devalued in a certain way, like where, women just like care about what they look like all the time or whatever. Like, but I think that's a result of colonization trying to suppress like the power of us taking ownership of like what we wear, who we are, and how we represent ourselves in public spaces. And so I think to like take that back, and maybe even is so powerful.
I'm really proud to be wearing a contemporary Indigenous fashion designer today named Leslie Deer. No relation, but from the same tribe. She makes these contemporary dresses and gowns using traditional symbolism, and so I'm really excited to be wearing that today here.
Well, and Marita, I apologize. I didn't want to devalue anything you've done. It's just an interesting thing for me as a dancer. It's like almost every single powwow I go to, there's a red shawl dance. And it's really exciting just seeing how the regalia now is really starting to reflect the times we're in, and people are using the regalia to get messages across. And I think it's wonderful. Your project is very inspiring. So thank you all.
I just want to throw in, I think it's more recently through social media, they're talking about how women didn't have pockets. Yeah. And so now you're seeing a lot of the ribbon skirts and like, look, I have pockets. So even in their traditional clothes, right? It was that if a woman had her hands in her pocket, she was like holding some secret or something. So, that has been a part of fashion, but I've seen some skirt designers more recently saying, look, now we're making skirts with pockets.
We carry things around too. I was actually just at the airport and I had my passport, my thing, and I was like, where am I supposed to? And I was like, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not a dude. I don't have a pocket right there. But like, I think I'm just going to go sew one because why wouldn't I have a pocket there? It's like,
just your Indian purse.
Hi, thank you very much for these presentations. I have a question that continues the conversation about resilience, but also about younger generations and the issues of shifting ways of thinking about gender relations and about domestic violence, but also the ways in which young women have taken over a lot of leadership, for instance, at Standing Rock. And there seems to be a new spirit of younger generational activism, and I was wondering if people could speak a little bit to that from your own experience.
Who wants to talk?
You're the youngest. I'm not that old.
I think I'm the oldest.
Being young, it's really empowering. There's this woman in Canada, her name is Tala Tatusis, and she talks about how we're all future ancestors, or we're all future elders. And so she talks about she just wrote a book recently, but I follow her on social media. But she talks about how it's important that youth be the leaders, because we have to prepare now to be for other generations to also take over. But seeing that and taking back our identities, not only just, in my case it would be with regalia, but it's important to set up the future for there to be a better road for other people to follow down. And I wish I could reiterate the question. Sorry, but yeah, it's extremely important that my mother always talks about how she never really was able to have a voice like I do, and some people comment about like me doing this at like a young age. I kind of wish I had other experiences, but this is priceless.
I would say, I think I'm the oldest person on stage. I'm not sure about that. I'm a professor now, and it really is true. I mean, I always thought it was cliche to say that you learn more from your students than you do than they learn from you. And I think part of that is because they are fresh to the, so if I'm talking about Oliphant and critiquing it, and I have a 20-year-old student who's learning about it and critiquing it, they can almost bring new critiques that I hadn't thought of before. And I think that's why I love teaching now. But social media, I think, has changed the scope and the face of this movement. Yeah. I remember, trying to be an activist in the early 1990s when I was a college student, and we didn't have Facebook and we didn't have Twitter. We certainly didn't have cell phones. And so I think that, now that more and more reservations have high-speed internet and have cell phone towers, I mean, there's still a long way to go. But I do believe that young people connecting with each other through hashtags, through Twitter, has created this movement of young people. And I really do value social media. I know it's easy to bash it these days, but when you're so isolated on a reservation and you think you're the only one working on this issue, and then you find 15, 20, 30, 40 other people through Twitter, I mean, that is an incredibly powerful.
I just want to say, as a young mom and having 4 children of my own, they're young adults, teenagers, late teenagers, it's important to create that space too, because thankfully I had great mentors that were bringing me along, that valued and seen the work that I was doing in my little community, whether it was just a sock drive or something that's saying, okay, we're going to add more emphasis to this or create a space for you to do this in. And especially in our work, we're always saying, who's that next person we're bringing up? Who's that next person we're bringing into the movement? If we don't have someone like her at the table, then we miss the whole point. And a lot of our young programs, your young people have to lead. Before I left my tribe, we started a youth council and we started a youth services program. We didn't set anything up. I said, I don't want no mission statement. I don't want anything set up. I just want to hire a director. But we have the young people decide what they want to do. Let them create their own program, because if we as adults are saying, again, this is what you should do, this is how you should do it, then it's never going to work. So creating that space for them and making sure we're bringing young people along, and then following their lead. When they're leading, let them lead. You just be there to support them. What she's doing, we don't want to come in and say, oh, you didn't plan enough, and so I don't want to walk with you, or let me, say something, I don't know. But being supportive of that and encouraging that. And I think, especially since Sandy walked from myself, being a 24-year-old tribal leader, I was like, where's all the people my age? Where's everybody at? And it was hard trying to get people motivated from doing their own things, or at that age still partying or hanging out, still in school. And I was always the youngest one in my peer group with my mom and all her friends. And it's like, okay, how do I get back to that? But thankfully they were creating space for me and valuing what I had to say. Because I got that when I was on tribal council. People were like, well, how old are you? You sound really young. I mean, that was really hard to battle, but then I had to show them my value and my worth. And I was able to stay on tribal council for over 10 years because of that. But just saying, okay, there's a platform, you have a voice, let's hear it, and encouraging that.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? The audience, don't be shy. Anybody else? Okay, in the back.
First, I'd just like to thank all of you for coming here and speaking. I have more of a comment than a question as an expansion to your comments about the effect of intergenerational trauma, the residential schools, the removals on the current rates of family violence. One thing that I've seen both in my own nation and speaking to you friends from Polynesia is that the abuse even goes back to childhood rearing practices, where in many of our traditional cultures, children were sacred. You did not lay hands on them. You did not treat them cruelly. And now you have so many generations who, from the missionary influence, from the greater cultural influence, they think, oh, you have to spare the rod or spoil the child. You have to be in control of them. You have to teach them respect the hard way. And these are not our traditional values. These are teaching the children just from a very, very young age that even in your home, you're not safe. The people who love you can treat you like this, and this is something normal. And just wanted to know if you had any thoughts.
I think you're absolutely right, and I think it's not just that generation, the last generation that came out of the boarding school, the residential school era. It's not just the harm that was done to them; it's how they were taught to parent.
Exactly.
They lost that chance to learn their own tribal nation's tradition and culture in their home setting, as we had since time immemorial, and that was replaced with a draconian, as you described it, sort of model that is not inherent to our culture or being at all. And so we have to unlearn that model and then restore our traditional teachings. And I know there are a lot of folks, and especially on the grassroots level, doing that work. And a lot of tribes have cultural restoration programs, but it's really hard. I mean, it's just hard work. And I think, when Sarah talked about, Native people have PTSD rates 4.4 times the national average. Well, that's one of the biggest reasons why, right? I mean, you can't go through multiple generations of catastrophic trauma and not come out having PTSD. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that.
I mean, child abuse is an incredible problem in Indian country today. We don't have the same kind of numbers that we have because you can't really survey children. There's ethical issues around getting numbers of, we can really only interview and survey adults ethically. But I would imagine that the rates of child abuse are as high as the rates of domestic violence. I think what we have to be careful about is that we don't use historical trauma as an excuse. I think it's an explanation. But there's a lot of people who don't beat their children who went through all of this trauma. And so it's delicate because, there's a fine line between an explanation and an excuse. I think it's important to have compassion for people who do commit violence, but we also need accountability. And that accountability doesn't have to look like jail time or anything like that, but it does need to be, this is not acceptable. And regardless of what we've been through, it's not acceptable and it needs to change.
It's a really important point, and so it's not an excuse, and we're not trying to let people off the hook for their bad behavior. But at the same time, we don't want to just put people in prison. We want to stop the violence. And how are we going to stop the violence? Well, we have to take a step back and understand where the violence is coming from. And that's why I think the work that organizations like Wicha Agli are doing at the Rosebud Reservation, where they're working with the tribal court, but individuals who are convicted of DV go into a program where they do a lot of cultural restoration and sort of work with these offenders to say, look, this is not who a Lakota man is supposed to be, and you restore those. But that's a lot of work, and it takes dedicated people on the ground in the community to do that work. And I think that's what we're looking at moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, ladies.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you all for your collective years of work on all of this. It's incredible. It's such an uphill battle, and you've made such progress. I wanted to do a shameless plug around VAWA and special tribal jurisdiction and ask you to talk a little bit more about what's missing. We felt like we won a great victory when we got it, but it is the sliver of the full moon. Yep. It's such a little piece. And what other pieces do you see us needing that everyone in the room here needs to be advocating for?
It's 1585, right?
Yes.
House Resolution, everybody write this down? No. House Resolution 1585 is the reintroduction of the Violence Against Women Act. You can go to congress.gov and sign up for alerts every time something happens with the bill. There's some restoration of additional sovereignty in that bill. I mean, the ridiculous thing is that Oliphant should just be overturned. There shouldn't be this piecemeal, fix. But that's where we are, and we got domestic violence, and we're going to get child abuse, and we're going to get violence against police officers, and we're going to get sexual assault, and we're going to get trafficking, and we're going to get drug trafficking, and eventually we're going to overturn Oliphant altogether. But for now, I mean, I think there's some tremendous changes in the current iteration of the Violence Against Women Act that's being shopped around right now, and I would encourage everyone to support it. We need more, but please do call your representatives, call your senators, and tell them why this is important. Tell them to watch this webcast. Tell them they need to vote yes.
Yeah, I think we feel pretty great about what's our chances are of getting this passed in the House. We have several specific provisions in the current draft reauthorization of VAWA that restore criminal jurisdiction over what Sarah just mentioned, crimes against law enforcement, crimes against children, sexual assault, sex trafficking. The Senate is going to be an uphill battle. And so if you can call your senator, whether they're Democrat or Republican, and just tell them this is critical. You have to restore tribal criminal jurisdiction over crimes against children, over sex trafficking. The two bills, you can say I support the House bill, the Senate needs to adopt the House bill because those provisions are currently, and also Alaska. And it's a long story that would take well, it's really not that long a story, but Alaska, our tribes all had the Dawes Act and Allotment Acts that took, so we had removal, forced removal. Okay, now you have your reservation in Indian Territory. Well, then in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Congress came in and just divided up our reservations and took that land away. Alaska had something similar called the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act in 1972, and in 1998, the United States Supreme Court interpreted that act to mean there's no Indian country left in Alaska. That's a legal term of art. But VAWA 904 in 2013, when it restored tribal criminal jurisdiction, because this, it's all legal terms of art here, restored that tribal criminal jurisdiction for crimes, for non-Indian crimes and domestic violence committed in Indian country. So the big problem is we have this Supreme Court case saying there is no Indian country in Alaska, and there are 228 tribes in Alaska that are basically carved out of VAWA, and they have within Indian country some of the highest rates of violence and murder. So the House bill we have right now also introduces a pilot project to allow 5 tribes in Alaska to implement this restored tribal criminal jurisdiction over non-Indians, which is another very critical component, because as of right now, our brothers and sisters in Alaska are just left out of the protections that were restored to our nations in 2013.
And I would just add that there are some communities in Alaska. I went to Alaska to write a story on the island of Cake, and there are some places that have absolutely no law enforcement, not one law enforcement officer. And I wrote about a murder there, and there was no one there. I mean, it took hours and hours for the Alaska State Police to fly in because they don't have officers to protect small communities.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the state of Maine is the same situation. So making sure that Alaska and Maine are specifically spelled out is important as well, because of how Indian land is defined, or Indian country is defined. And having allies, understanding the Violence Against Women Act is universal. It's to protect all women. And that includes the LGBT community, the immigrant community, as well as our Native community. So, we have great allies and partners like Rob Valente that are advocating on behalf of all of us. So it isn't just an Indian issue, it isn't just an Indian act, but it's to protect all women. And these are the increased things that we need for Indian country or for Indigenous women in their communities. So that's why it's important that you're looking at all communities. The National Indigenous Women's Resource Center is part of the National Task Force on the Violence Against Women. So Mary Kathryn has been so kind to be on a lot of those phone calls and being an advocate, ear to the ground and boots on the ground, making sure Indian country voices are heard on those phone calls, the Indian country is not left out, as well as the National Congress of American Indians. So we're working together to make sure all of Indian country is covered as best we can, and taking all that information and spreading it across Indian country. There's actually a phone call probably about right now saying what's the next step. So again, if you're on Facebook, social media like NIW or National Indigenous Women's Resource Center or NIWRC.org, we'll try to keep the most latest updates, actions, call to action, as well as the National Task Force. They send out emails. You can sign up to be on their listserv that says here are the action steps. So it'll give you a list of congressmen and women to call, but definitely everybody, whatever area you live in, call. Even if there's tribes that don't have state call, because we still need those votes.
Was there one last question in the back?
Hauka. I'm came here from Kumeyaay and Tongva land, flew in and got here 5 minutes before I saw Sarah. And so Jaime, sorry. I can't help but think in this journey, I think that we've all taken together, that now we, as we gather together and come face to face, that each one carries a specific calling, and to bring visibility to this tragedy that we're in. I want to ask you, because you've all taken your own individual path, what is the spiritual substance of your practice that you do to restore and maintain your balance? Because I know in walking this journey that the weight and the burden of being invested emotionally and spiritually, it becomes actually not so much just a burden, but actually oftentimes our lives begin even reenacting some of the trauma that our sisters have undergone, and we also carry that front line that we walk in the spirit realm, in the spiritual underground. And so how do we as a people make sure that missing and murdered Indigenous women doesn't, the movement in itself doesn't protect it from being, one, commodified or exploited, the new trend that people are jumping on, and because now it's getting a lot of exposure. And I've also witnessed that despite awareness and rising consciousness collectively, that there's still ongoing murders and daily that we see young girls going missing, and the stories continue, one more. It just keeps coming in, and the protection of these girls and women seems to have such urgency, because as we expose it, we're also exposing them to be more vulnerable. So there is more opportunity for people that walk in that kind of mental sickness to take advantage. Oh, because maybe she's just a missing one, she'll just go away as one of those missing one, or I can get away with this and that. So there's this whole kind of spiritual war that we're in. But then also, I understand that there's legal steps in things that need to happen, but on a spiritual level, how is it, and what are your practices, and how do you maintain that balance for yourself and keep it of substance and rooted in the spirit?
Okay, I can talk. I think, I've always been a really spiritual person, but I was kind of taught to I didn't grow up with that, I just always did it on my own, but I was taught to kind of suppress it from lots of different angles, growing up in, the culture we do here. But, and so it wasn't until maybe 4 years into doing the Red Dress Project that I realized what I was really doing spiritually. And realized how, just what an enormous spiritual responsibility that is, and how very carefully I need to tread on that path, but also, but also it's a calling, right? And so it's a calling. So, and I promise to do this work in the best way that I can. And part of that was balancing, looking at, not only statistics and policies and reports and that kind of stuff, which I'm not even really into that stuff. So it's wonderful that we have all these things represented here, because, it's important to look at all different sides of it for sure, and fight from all different perspectives. And, we need lots of different women warriors on our team. But yeah, so I think, spiritual protection has really become extremely important for me over the course of doing this work. I don't really have any remedies, but staying connected to that and to the spirit of what we are doing and why we are doing it is so important to like reconnect in whatever way that is, because it's very easy to get lost in the colonial powers that are pushing us this way, or these people who want to, like I just went through like 3 weeks of interviews. Like it just was like, and it's like, it's easy to get, kind of knocked off the path and like start doing something that might not be with integrity towards what we're working for. So I guess a spiritual practice and like for me, it's connecting to the land. And that's where I get my power back, and like kind of like stilling your mind and getting to a place where like, okay, like remembering the center and like the space of integrity that we have to approach this work from regularly, which is not always possible. But yeah, so that's very important to me, yeah.
Did someone want to say that?
For me, growing up in a very Southern Baptist home, from both sides of my family, Christianity is very much a part of my life. So that's what I go back to, is just always prayer for Creator. Because when I got into this, I'm like, why did all this stuff happen to me? What am I supposed to do with that? And it was, I got to turn this into something good. I can't be this thing or this, I can't have this hold me. And my tattoo, my wedding ring, symbolizes my clan, my bird clan, and my husband's big cat clan, and where he's more ceremonial and I'm more church, but yet we understand that mix. And for us, even my Muskogee church, it's in the language. The songs are in the language, and it's set up like our ceremonial grounds are, and it's that balance. And then for us, respecting each other's religious or spiritual preferences, but yet supporting it too. And so participating in ceremony. And now that I'm moved away from where our tribal headquarters are and our tribal lands now, it's important for me to always go back. I have to go back. I can't stay in the place that I'm at. So we make that point to say, okay, ceremony is going to be in the summer. We have to go back. And I think a lot of us do that to stay grounded and to stay within our tribal communities, or participating in new ways in our new communities if we're living outside of our communities as well.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but I want to take a few minutes here to thank each of our speakers, but also to recap what we heard today. For those of you who came in a little later or tuned in to the webcast a little later, I want to thank Sarah Deer. We're all glad that you followed through with your research project, What Has Happened to Us. She took us through, as she said, the brutal and uncomfortable history of violence against Native American women, and shared the staggering statistics of 1 in 2 women experiencing sexual violence, and 84.3% of Native women who experience violence. She talked about the gang rape on the Trail of Tears, the boarding schools where children were sexually assaulted, and then the historical trauma of modern sex trafficking after the policy of urban migration, and now the man camps. But she ended by talking about historical resilience and the powerful and inspiring words, "We're still here." And she told us about the resiliency of Lisa Marie Yati, and the bravery of Diane Milich, who was shot by her white husband, who was not prosecuted, and then she herself fought hard for the Violence Against Women Act. So thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Mary Kathryn Nagle, who writes plays and also writes law review articles. Her talk was fascinating, and she highlighted the outrageous and infamous Supreme Court case of 1978, Oliphant, known as Oliphant, but a lot of people don't know about that case. And of course, the last sentence of that case, where the Supreme Court said Congress had to decide on tribal jurisdiction. And then it took 35 years for the Violence Against Women Act, the amendment to pass. I went out in 2014 outside of Tucson, where I'm from, and the Pasco-Yaqui was the first tribe to implement that law that for the first time allowed the tribal prosecution of non-Indians who assaulted, raped, and hurt tribal women. She also showed us photos of Obama signing the law and a photo of the same woman, Diane Millich, who, was shot by her white husband. And I wrote about that case actually in 2014. And I remember that this is really crazy, and this really tells you about jurisdictional issues in Indian country. The investigators brought measuring tape to that crime scene to determine where the gun was fired and where one of Diane Millich's colleagues had been struck. And then they had a map to figure out the jurisdiction and whether the state, the federal government, or the tribe had jurisdiction. I mean, this is what goes on. So WADA, Mary Kathryn. We heard from Jaime Black, Métis, the artist. So we had messages today, not only through history and theater, but also through art. And she, of course, brought us this incredible red dress project. If you haven't seen it, it is so haunting and evocative, and don't leave without going out and taking a look. And she explained to us how and why she created this project and how she reconnects to the land to heal herself. Then thank you, Cherrah Giles, who shared with us her own very personal and painful story of sexual assault and abuse as a child and as a teenager. An experience of so many Native women. You brought that to life for all of us here today, the story of violence that's so often just told in cold statistics. And Cherrah has turned her experience of pain and of shame into advocacy and to helping other women with the Strong Hearts Hotline. So we all thank you for that. And then Marita Growing Thunder, we thank you. She wore a beautiful traditional dress today that she made herself and spoke to us from her beautiful heart. She was inspired by an aunt who was murdered to create a project that was dedicated to missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And she has re-owned the traditional Indian dress for the children in boarding schools who, as she told us, their culture and style of dress was stripped away. And so we thank all of you, and I want to thank you for coming out today on pretty bad weather. But we really appreciate your coming out and for staying so long into the afternoon. And I'd finally like to thank Elizabeth Kennedy Gish, who may be in the audience, the manager of seminars and symposia programs at the National Museum of the American Indian. And she is the person who organized this today, and she invited me to participate. I must say it was a true honor to share this stage with all of you. Thank you.
It was